Well, everyone, we've got a great guest with us today. This is Jeff Hunter, and Jeff is a physician. I'm going to let him tell you about his practice, what he does. But his story isn't about being a doctor, it's a story about his son and something that happened years ago. And I'll let him go into the story. But Jeff was my college roommate for a year, and Jeff was. I hadn't talked to him after college for probably 15, 20 years. And I saw him one time during that time, saw him, talked to him a little, didn't talk to him much. And then about 10 years later, we got together for a big weekend, and I went and saw him at his practice, and we took a drive from Tyler down to Longview. And I asked him, I said, Jeff, I heard a long time ago that you almost lost a child, and I never asked anyone about the details about it. I said, would you like to share those with me? And when Jeff shared it with me, we were both crying. I mean, get your Kleenex out, because I can promise
you. It was not a very safe drive. We couldn't see very good.
It wasn't, but I felt like it was one of those stories that was it was miraculous, and it just inspired me so much. It's something that I wanted to be able to share with my audience and just everyone I meet, because it was such an amazing story. And I was so happy when I started this. I thought this is an avenue where I can get Jeff's story out. So Jeff, this is Jeff Hunter, everyone. And Jeff, I'd like you to kind of share who you are, what you do in the world, and then go back to your story. But I want people to know who you are.
Well, who I am, first of all, I'm a child of God. And so that's my first identity, is that nothing that, my parents gave me the name Jeff Hunter, and that's my name. But I've been a believer in the loving, forgiving grace of Jesus since I was a 8-year-old child. And since then, my identity has always been in Him. And although I've maybe fallen away from that identity a couple times and tried to pursue a worldly thing, lately, I've come back to understand the true meaning of that. So that's the first disclaimer. But what I do professionally, or to help make a living, is that I am a pediatric ophthalmologist, and I also do what's called adult strabismus, which just means I fix adults with double vision or crossed eyes. But my job as a pediatric ophthalmologist is really what I consider my true calling, because I just love kids and just the aspects of ophthalmology. It's technical, it's precise, and it's life-changing. Just to be able to either save a kid's vision or give them back vision is a very gratifying part of my job.
That's amazing.
And then the other part of my job with kids is I get to watch them grow up. And so I see these kids sometimes from the day they're born, and now I'm starting to see the kids of kids. So I have grand patients now, and so that's been a pretty sweet thing over the last nearly 30 years of doing this. And I practice in East Texas, and my home base is in Tyler, Texas. I do go to Longview sometimes. And my partner in all this is Kelly, and Kelly and I have been a thing since 1982.
High school sweethearts, folks. That may still have one of the best marriages. You guys should run a marriage seminar, because it's genuine, authentic, and real. It always has been.
Yeah, I mean, literally every day still, after 36 and a half years of marriage, I look at myself in the mirror and say, how did I ever get her to say yes to me to go on a date? And then second, how did I dupe her into marrying me? So I've just married, I tell people I married the prom queen. And she really is the prom queen, but when you meet her, you'd understand exactly what I mean, that she's just the total package of kindness and beauty and grace, and my kids love her. I mean, she's the perfect mom.
She really is an amazing person. I can vouch for that as well. So Jeff, take us back to what year was it? Kind of paint the picture, what you were doing that day, and just walk people through kind of how you did me, step by step, because I want them to understand and feel what a miraculous event occurred in that day.
Yeah, of course, as most things that happen unexpectedly, they're unexpected. So it goes back to 1997. Matter of fact, Kelly and I had moved to Tyler in 1996, and we lived in a little rent house, and then we ended up finding some property, and it needed lots of renovation. So we bought it and closed on it at the early part of 1997, moved in. And so this was in September of 97. Actually, it's September 9th, 1997. It's kind of a cool date. It's 9797. And it's a Sunday evening, and we're working in the yard trying to get some of the yard work done. The people that owned the house before us, their hedges were tomato plants. And so we were in the process of pulling out tomato plants in the front garden. And this house is really long, and it's out on some acreage. And in my front yard, probably 150 yards from my house, the corner of my house, I have a 2-acre pond. And it goes down a hill and into the pond. And Kelly and I were out front working, and also in the back of this house is a barn, and the guy that we bought the house from gave us his 2 old horses. They're probably 28 or 30 years old. And so, but part of these horses kind of routine is that every day around 5 o'clock, they just knew to walk up to the barn and that they would be fed. So my wife and my son Will at the time was 16 months old, and the 3 of us were working outside. And my 2 older children, Cody and his sister Emma, were upstairs with a friend. A friend had come over to visit that day, and the reason he came to visit was because his parents had to go to a funeral of their best friend's child who had just drowned the day before. But the family was drawn out of town, but they needed something to do with their son. And so his name was Mark, and we gladly said, we'll take care of Mark while y'all are gone. And so Mark was at our house this morning. So all these little things are just tied into my story. So anyways, we are out working out front, and the kids are upstairs, I guess, watching videos or playing, and little Will's right in between us. And then I look out through the garage window that I can see in the back by the barn, and I see that one of the horses is up at the barn. And so I go back to the back of the barn and walk around the corner, and I look back, and Will is still between Kelly and I, and he's playing in the dirt. And he's probably 15, 20 feet to my right, and he's probably 20 or 30 feet to Kelly's left. And so I walk back to the barn, and once I get back there, I get distracted. I have to open up grain to feed and feed the horses, and I pet them for a while. And then so about 10 or 12 minutes later, I come back to the front, and when I walk around the corner, Kelly says, "Where's Will?" And I said, "I thought he was with you." And then she said, "Well, when you went around the corner, he went around the corner with you." And so immediately my first thought was, go to the pond. So we had these 2 geese that were at the pond that he was fascinated with, and they weren't very nice geese, but he would always want to touch them. And so my first thought was, where are the geese, and go to look at the pond. And I ran to the edge of this hill, and when you run to the edge of this hill, you can see out all the way across the entire pond. Pretty much every shoreline you can see. And it was a very warm day. It was probably in the low 90s that day, and the water was perfectly smooth. I mean, there wasn't a ripple. I scanned the lake and didn't see anything. Then I yelled back to Kelly, "He's not here. Go look inside." So we went on a mad dash around, going in every room and going around back to the barn. So I probably spent 3 or 4 minutes just in a dash in the backyard looking for him. We just couldn't find him anywhere. And also at the time, part of the important part of the story is we had these 2 Labrador puppies. They were probably 6 months old. And the first time I went down to the pond, these 2 Labrador puppies were just over on the side of the pond, hanging out like they normally did. It wasn't anything unusual, but they weren't in the water, and they were just playing with each other. And so, anyways, when I'm back at the barn, 5 minutes after the initial distress call, I said, "Go look back at the voice inside me said, go back to the pond." So I went back to the pond, and as I got to the edge of the hill where I could see, all of a sudden those 2 black lab puppies were out in the water, probably 8 or 10 feet out from shore, and I was watching them looking for something, and they were swimming in a circle. And I was like, that's weird. So I start kind of jogging down by the pond. It's about probably 50 or 60 yards down to the edge of the shore. So as I get closer and closer to see why they're out in the water, kind of swimming in that pattern, then I saw Will's silhouette underwater and kind of a dead man's float. And I immediately went into Jeff Hunter doctor mode. So first thing I did was I yelled for Kelly to call 911. I said, he's in the pond. And I looked at my watch. It was 5:03 p.m. And the reaction was just, whenever a doctor is called into emergency, you check the clock because you want to know when the process of resuscitation starts. So I jumped upon. The second thing I noted besides the time was the second my foot hit the water is really warm. And as a physician, warm water and drownings are kind of a bad combination because warm water has lots of bacteria and doesn't have the same effect as cold water does physiologically on your body. So I kind of noted that mentally, and then I just kind of grab him, and he's in his little blue onesie that we had on him that day, and I just go down, and he was super blue and wasn't breathing. So I ran up on shore, and I ran up to a part of the shore that was kind of flat. It was pretty steep there, but I just carried him under my arm like a football over toward the driveway, which is probably 20 yards back to my north, and put him on the edge of the ground. And then I'm yelling at Kelly to get an emergency vehicle here. And I'm looking at him, and he's super blue and not breathing. And I'm trying to figure out what do I need to do? And so that's once again when doctor mode kicks in. So all those years of training to be a physician, although as an ophthalmologist, all those previous years of training paid off in that minute.
So Jeff, real quick, you knew you knew what to do professionally. What was going on inside? Was there just work the problem, or was there this? I think most people would have this paralyzing fear just rush through them. What happened for you?
Yeah, there wasn't any mental block or paralysis. I just knew I needed help, or he needed help, and I could do the basics. But the other was CPR's easier done with two people. So, and Kelly was on the phone with the 911, but she couldn't get more than a few feet from the house because it was a radio. Back then, we didn't have the broadband width and cell phones, so she had to stay within about 30 feet of the house. And so we're basically yelling up the hill at each other, and they're telling me what to do. And I told them don't. I said, send Cody down. So at that time, Cody, who was 8 at the time, came out, and my son Cody ran down the hill to join me. And I showed him real quick. I said, you have to push on the chest here with your hands, push down about an inch or two, and I'll do the breathing for him. And Cody didn't even ask any questions. He just is a very compliant kid and just did really well. And we did CPR for probably 1 to 2 minutes, I would think. And then at that time, he started coughing a little bit. And so that made me feel really good that he had a neurologic response to cough. And so when he started coughing and what we call agonal breathing is when you're kind of taking sporadic breaths, but nothing with intention. And so he started having a little bit of agonal breathing, and his color was a little better. And so what I did is I just scooped him up and took him up the hill to the inside of the foyer where it was closer to the cell phone service. And I put the phone up to my ear and kind of gave doctor talk to because I knew the 911 people were recording everything. So I knew that people would be emergency personnel will be listening. So I told them, how long he'd been down, what I did. So I just kind of what we call doctor talk, and did that. And they said, well, they said the ambulance is on the way. And I said, okay, but we live out in the country. We're about 8 miles from probably the closest fire station or whatever. And I could hear a siren in the background. And I said, I hear a siren. And they said, oh, that's the trooper, the state trooper. So, and my house is about 175 yards from our front gate, and the gate was open. And so as I'm sitting there, and I'd stopped doing CPR because he was breathing, I could feel a pulse, but he just needed, oxygen, and we just needed to get him assessed. So still didn't know how much damage or anything was going on with his brain. And I figured he'd been underwater between 7 and 10 minutes. And so we postulated that he could have some damage to his brain. And so as the state trooper comes up the road and pulls into my driveway, and I scoop roll up and I get in the front seat with him, I said, "Let's go." And he goes, "Well, the ambulance will be here soon." I said, "No, we got to go." Because to me, soon could have been a minute, or it could have been 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And so I said, "No, let's go." So we drove down the driveway, and as we got to the top of my driveway, I live on a highway. And so as I looked to the north to the highway, I could see the ambulance probably a half mile away coming. So I said, "Okay, stop here. We'll get out and wait for the ambulance because they have equipment that we need." And here's where the story gets hard. I didn't even bring a tissue, and I knew this was going to happen. How unprepared of me. But anyways, the ambulance pulled in, they put him in the ambulance and hooked him up to pulse oximeter. I think his pulse oximeter was like 82, which is low, but it's still reasonable. And he wasn't as blue, but he was still breathing kind of agonally. I said, "Well, let's go." And they said, "Well, the helicopter's on the way." And that's when the emergency community, you could really see how they worked as a team, because all of a sudden about 6 volunteer firemen got there about the same time, and they stopped the traffic on the highway, and the helicopter lands right on the highway, and they just scoop them up and take them away. And so that was just an amazing thing to see. And I was like, I said I want to go with them, and they said, "You can't go in the helicopter." So I sent Kelly in a car, and they took him away. And so I didn't have contact with them for quite a while longer. But we did have cell phones back then. But Kelly and I got on the cell phone, and I had to stay behind the state trooper, and the authorities had to know the story just to make sure it wasn't some kind of foul play. But anyways, after they realized it was a true event, and they let me go, then ended up going to the hospital. And when I got into the emergency room, I heard him wailing because they were trying to stick him for an IV. And when he was wailing and his pulse ox, I looked at the screen, it was in the upper 90s. I knew that he was going to be okay. So fast forwarding, months or years later, he has no neurologic deficit, and he didn't even get pneumonia. They did x-rays of his chest, and they think when he fell in the water, he ended up being the kind of kid that instead of panicking, he just held his breath. And when he held his breath, he just eventually passed out. And so he didn't really get any dirty water in his lungs. And within 36 hours, we were out of the hospital, and he did well. So,
and you also told me in the middle of that, I think your church fell in, and they just put a message out for everyone to tell us about that. What?
Yeah, that's another part of the story that we never saw. It was happening. It was God's working outside what we were doing. So, we were focused in the moment. And also that same evening, my parents had left about 3 o'clock that afternoon to go back to Dallas. They live in the Dallas area. And so on the way to the hospital, we called them, and they just turned around and came back. And went to the hospital. What was going on at church was, on Sunday evenings, they have a church service about 5 or 5:30, and we couldn't make it that night because we knew that we'd be working. And so anyways, they tape all these recordings, but my wife was on the phone as she's on the way to the hospital trying to call all of our friends that we had become close with, because all of our friends at that time, because we've only been in town for less than a year, were church friends, and nobody would pick up their phone because everybody's in church. And so what happened was she finally got a hold of one friend named Johnette, who's still one of our dear friends. And Johnette said, "Well, my husband, Clay, who's an attorney, was preparing for a case, and his law office is right across the street from the church." So she goes, "Let me call Clay." So she called Clay, and Clay went across the street. But one of the coolest things about this is they video the the church services on video. And so we can go back and watch this later. So Clay, just a minute or two after Johnette calls him, just walks into the side door of the church, and you see him walk up on the side of the stage and whispers in the associate pastor's ear as they're doing a song or something. And then all of a sudden the associate pastor gets up and stands to the mic and says, "The Hunters are having an emergency. Their son was a near drown, and they need your prayers." And so they prayed right there, stopped the service, and then after the amen was over, about half the church left, and they came up to the hospital to see us.
So you had amazing support. That's
Yeah,
and,
great community. Yeah.
yeah, definitely, definitely. It still gets me. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so
Well,
much.
sure.
Uh,
I
I
tell that story
that's one of
100 times, and it still gets me.
yeah. And that's why I wanted people to hear it, because if anyone knows anything about not being able to breathe and getting water in your lungs and being under warm water for that long, it's just a miracle that he really came out of it. And what he's a musician now, right?
Yeah. Oh, and I was also going to add those two dogs that kind of gave me the clue that he was in the water. Within 6 months, they were both dead. They were they were such a short time with us on life, but they had such an important role because, if I hadn't seen them swimming out in the pond, might not have looked because he was wearing a dark suit and the water's dark, and it was just we might not have found him for a long time. So, anyways, those dogs had a divine purpose
Absolutely.
as well. So,
And
but yeah, but Will is a musician, and he's up here in Nashville. He's trying to get his career started. He's 26 now, and just got engaged a few weeks ago, and he's going to be married soon. But he's a great songwriter, and he's my most tender-hearted kid. And
so, is he with a band, or is he on his own right now? What is he doing?
yeah, he has a band. He's the front man for a band called Pacific. They do alternative rock, and I mean, they're doing okay. They're what I call revenue producing right now, but they do some great songs, and we're hoping that over time, just his commitment to the industry and his talents will lead to something big for him. But he has lots of jobs, but his real job is being the lead singer and the writer of most of the songs for Pacific.
Yeah. And I just think of how everything could have gone a different way that day. And I remember you saying when we met together, said every time I hear his songs, it's like that is out there in the world that wouldn't have been there at that if it hadn't been for him coming out of that so gracefully.
Yeah, there's so many things that this parallels in life that, and just this week with the Supreme Court supposedly wanting to reverse Roe v. Wade, my wife and I were talking about that situation, and it always has been in the back of my mind that all the kids that were not ever born to live what the world's missing out on, their talents and their love and all the stuff, that we'll never know what contribution those kids could have made if they were just here to make the contribution. So there's a lot of parallels in that story to what we experience in Will's life, that the music and the just the joy that he brings people, because he's so loving and so kind, and he's one of my four favorite children.
That's great. That's great. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being with us today, and I hope everyone out there was touched like I was. It's an amazing thing when we can actually experience something like that in our lives, or someone in our lives having a victorious moment, a breakthrough, a miracle, whatever you feel like calling it. It's something that inspires me that there's something else out there that helps us along the way. So Jeff, thank you so much. I appreciate it and love you, brother.
You too. Thank you for having me on the show.